Welcome back, folks. It is time once again to get into this splendid book by Robert Knapp, Invisible Romans, Prostitutes, Outlaws, Slaves, Gladiators, Ordinary Men and Women, the Romans that history forgot. As I said in the first video to this some time back, been waiting for a long time to read this book because this entire channel is dedicated to two things: me dealing with my own social anxiety, wherein I find even talking to a camera intimidating. And more importantly, for me and everybody else here who might come across this, I'm a blue collar worker. I grew up poor. I grew up struggling. Family worked hard for everything they ever got. And whenever history was told to me about the Romans and the Greeks or anyone else, it's usually from the perspective of scholars and popular senators who wrote like Cicero, emperors and rulers like Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and so on. And I would always ask, what about everybody else? What about the vast majority of people? And often when I was younger, I was told we don't really know much about them. And they don't really matter because they couldn't read or write, so they didn't leave anything that was worth knowing. Now, I'm so glad that historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, sociologists, so on, are taking looks at ancient cultures and asking about what was it like to be the average Roman, not just because you'd want to know what the similarities and differences, but also because that is the vast majority of any population. So while it's wonderful to get the gist and the meaning and the meat of a great rhetorical speech, um, I'm not putting any of that down at all. And I advise anybody who wants to get into history to learn them and read them. Um, it still is leaving out like 99% of any population. So if this can glean something for us and open our eyes to any understanding, while at the same time taking people like me and giving me a point of reference into the past that I didn't have before, awesome. We left off with reading some of chapter 1, in which most of that talk was about how the Romans viewed merchants and how merchants viewed Rome and other people. And so merchants and people who dealt with money weren't really seen as all that great. But we literally left off with, I think the last sentence of this paragraph was, various artisanal activities are mentioned as well as business situations. There is no hint that people so engaged were looked down upon. So even though traditionally Rome seemed to shun people who dealt with money or did manual labor, merchants were overall not seen as bad as was once considered. Okay, cool. So with that being said, I'm going to now start with the next full paragraph. This is on page 11, still in chapter 1. We'll see where this takes us, and I'll read until I get tired of moving my mouth. Along the way, I'll give my own opinions, which are important to nobody but me. But we'll see where this goes and how much more we can learn. So hope you'll listen along. And also, if you haven't already, get your copy. Thus, the ordinary man's world was open to craftsmen and merchants without prejudice. Many epitaphs mention the profession or work of the deceased. Work is part of the self-identity of the dedicatee. For almost all epitaphs, 98% are made either by the deceased himself or by family. Almost none are made by fellows in the profession or work, or by patrons. That last bit sticks out a little bit to me because I understand to a slight extent how much patronage was important in Rome. So the fact that most epitaphs on graves were not written by the patrons speaks volumes. Because you could just as well consider that maybe the patrons didn't care to, or that religiously or socially they didn't think it was their place, or etc. But since work often defines someone's life, it's not the fact that it's also not written by the people or their fellow work peers, their vocation, is interesting. But then again, funerary services were and always have been very familial. So the elite, of course, do not mention work As for them, it is not something to be proud of. However, all others, free, freed, and slave, do mention it prominently. Here is clear evidence that one of the marks of the ordinary man's mind world, quote, parentheses, and of all below the elite for that matter, is the value of work. I do the same thing. I spend most of my time Monday through Friday at my job, where I'm a courier and I drive a box truck talking about work. And I spend the weekend trying my best to not think about it. So, this is one of the most striking differences between the elite and the common man's perspective. Indeed, the elite prejudice that looks down on labor and business helps to explain ordinary man's invisibility. We must firmly lay aside any idea that work was not valued in the Roman world. The elite's devaluation of labor does not extend to the vast majority of Roman Greek society. Exactly. Just because the upper echelons of Greek society, the patricians and the equestrian class, can glance out from the steps, top of the steps of the Senate or their estates or whatever, and somehow not see 99% of the population. That's got nothing to do with the fact that 99% of the population is very much thinking about work, labor, and reward and what's going to happen. So we should take this into account when dealing with any society. What are the majority of people thinking? What were the majority of people doing every day? And how was it different from the next kingdom or nation over? Although the hierarchical nature of society required that prejudices be important, the moral world of ordinary men was much more complex than a collection of stereotypes. Thank you. It's worthwhile constructing a picture of that world, although naturally any single moral outlook was not necessarily reflected in the daily life of an individual. I can summarize briefly the main points of a man's moral world. Marriage is a good thing. Monogamy is the norm. Loyalty in marriage is important. Wives are to be faithful, available, and alluring. Husbands chaste. Men reject the philosophic view that sex is a distraction done for procreation and without enjoyment. Chastity is valued, but does not extend to the point that male homosexual relationships and occasional male infidelity are unacceptable. Visiting prostitutes is a neutral activity, as is discussed elsewhere. Divorce is possible and acceptable. Lying, cheating, and stealing are in principle bad. Honesty in dealings in kinship groups and with socioeconomic equals or superiors is expected. However, business with others exists in an ambiguous state which allows quote-unquote sharp dealing and deceit for personal gain. Fair and just treatment of all is good, although quote-unquote fair is based on a distributive concept of justice. Acquisitiveness is a positive virtue. Excessive acquisitiveness, i.e. avarice, taking possessions that are not rightfully yours, is bad. For the more philosophically inclined, self-sufficiency is a moral commonplace. All this sounds mostly in line with the average working person, at least today, at least where I am in the Northeast of America. Self-confidence is a positive virtue, while arrogance and boasting, i.e. self-confidence outstripping appropriate expression according to socioeconomic status, is a bad thing. Humility is a commonplace, in parentheses, the opposite of excessive pride. A strong sense of self-worth is good. A person has the obligation to protect his standing, in parentheses, honor. Almost any action is justified by this. But at the same time, there is a sentiment for self-restraint, which is a common topos in popular philosophy. Drunkenness, for example, is frowned upon. Murder is bad. Minding one's own business is yet another common topos. Gossip and being a busybody are bad. Taking care of those in need within your family, e.g. widows, is good. Looking to the welfare of those more distant from you is not good. Beyond immediate family, friends are highly valued. Indeed, friendship is another constant topos of popular philosophy and culture. Seeking control in an uncertain world. While this range of moral vision seems unexceptional and served to guide a man through normal life experiences, when any uncertainty disrupted the smooth flow of life, and it must have done so almost constantly, men turned to the supernatural, superstition, magic, and religion. The ordinary person found many willing to allay his concerns. The priests in the temples, the purveyors of charms and potions on the streets and in small kiosks, the professional magicians ready to supply incantations for any need. The dream interpreters, eager for the opportunity to reveal all based on one's latest somnolent imaginings. The booksellers with tomes of useful information. All were at the ready in even the smallest town. Superstition in general guided life. Amulets have been found in great number. Bracelets, necklaces, and rings were all thought to be effective charms against the unknown. Charms were commonly used against all manner of ills. Pliny the Elder writes, certainly spells exist against hail, against a wide range of diseases, and to treat burns. Some even have proven effectiveness. And arrows pulled from a body, provided they have not touched the ground, are powerful aphrodisiacs if placed under a lover's bed. That is from Natural History 28.5 and to 0.29 and 28.6.34. Marcellus Empiricus gives an example of a charm against disease. To be recited sober, touching the relevant part of the body with 3 fingers, thumb, middle finger, and ring finger. The other 2 are stretched out. Go away, no matter whether you originated today or earlier. This disease, this illness, this pain, this swelling, this redness, this goiter, these tonsils, these abscess, this tumor, these glands, and the little glands I call forth, I lead forth, I speak forth, through this spell, from these limbs and bones. On medicaments 15.11. Spells came in handy too if you had a wager on a chariot race and wanted to ensure your victory, as the sled tablet from Africa shows. I conjure you, Damon, whoever you may be, to torture and kill, from this hour, this day, this moment, the horses of the green and the white teams. Kill and smash the charioteers, Clarus, Felix, Primulus, Romanus. Do not leave a breath in them. I conjure you by him who has delivered you at the time, the god of the sea and the air, Easdal. Aya. That is one seriously desperate guy wanting to win. That's okay. Or if you sought revenge, which the first one sounds like it's just revenge against people you don't actually know, but okay. Lady Demeter, I appeal to you as one who has suffered wrongs. Hear me, goddess, and render justice, so that you bring the most terrible and painful things on those who think such things about us and who rejoice together against us, and bring suffering on me and my wife, Epictetus, and despise us. O Queen, lend an ear to those of us who suffer, and punish those who look happily on such as us. Amorgos, Greece/Geiger, number 75. Or punishment for a personal wrong. Whoever sold the property of Varenus, whether woman or man, let him pay with his own blood. From the money which he will pay back, 1/2 is donated to Mercury and Wertus. Kelvin and Exus/Geiger, number 97. Or even to steal another man's wife. Let burning heat consume the sexual parts of Alice, her vulvas, her members, until she leaves the household of Apollonius. Lay Alice low with fever, with sickness unceasing, starvation, Alice, and madness. Remove Alice from Apollonius, her husband. Give Alice insolence, hatred, obnoxiousness, until she departs the household of Apollonius. Now, quickly. And that is from an Oxyrhynchus papyrus in Egypt/Geiger, number 35. And of course, love was a constant motivation for magical incantations. Let Matrona, to whom Tegene gave birth, whose quote-unquote stuff you have, including hairs of her head, love Theodoros, to whom Tecosis gave birth. Do not ignore me, whoever you are, but awaken yourself for me and go off to Matrona, so that she may freely give me everything that is hers, so that Matrona love Theodoros for all the time of her life. I invoke you in the name of Abrasax, another Oxyrhynchus papyrus from Egypt. That's number 29. Amateur incantations were common for everyday occurrences. Some amulets were inscribed with the magical word Abraxas, which has been passed down to the present day as abracadabra. In Christian times, ritual formulae could also be turned to magical purposes. For example, the intonation of hoc est corpus, this is the body. This gives the modern term hocus pocus. But for serious matters, professionals, male and female, were at hand to offer aid. Of course, witches such as Circe in the Odyssey and Medea in Euripides had a long literary pedigree, but their real-life counterparts were thick on the ground. Egypt was the land and source of magicians par excellence. Magical papyri represent the textbooks for training. the critical piece of information left out so that the professionals couldn't be entirely supplanted by a self-taught person. Kits for magical performance survive from antiquity, including one that seems to be a sort of roulette wheel used for divining the future. A professional could also come equipped with drugs such as incest to create an atmosphere, as well as with tools such as wands to quote unquote direct the magical power wielded. Jesus of Nazareth had many of the attributes of a magician, the ability to cure illness and to control nature, for example. When the devil tries to tempt him to use this power for personal gain and influence, Jesus refuses, but other magicians had no such scruples. In Apuleius' novel The Golden Ass, Pamphile uses her magic for her own purposes. Other magicians were more commercial, however. Paul was seized and hauled before the local authorities because his quote-unquote cure of a slave, soothsayer, deprived her owners of income. That is Acts 16, verses 16 through 19. Another magician competed with Paul for the attention of Sergius Paulus, the proconsul of Cyprus, and lost, Acts 13, verses 6 through 12. Simon Magus, the magician, was one such person who made a living purveying magic. But there was a man named Simon who had previously practiced magic in the city and amazed the nation of Samaria, saying that he himself was somebody great. They all gave heed to him, from the least to the greatest, saying, quote, "This man is that power of God which is called great." And they gave heed to him because for a long time he had amazed them with his magic. In brackets, Simon, impressed with the magical power of the apostle Philip is baptized. Now when Simon saw that the Spirit was given through the laying on of the apostles' hands, he offered them money, saying, "Give me also this power, that anyone on whom I lay my hands may receive the Holy Spirit." But Peter said to him, "Your silver perish with you, because you thought you could obtain the gift of God with money. I see that you were in the gall of bitterness and in the bond of iniquity." And that comes to us from Acts 8, verses 9 through 24. Simon, a good magician who could see when he was out-magicianed, was terrified and asked Peter, his recognized superior magician, that, quote, "that nothing of what you have said may come upon me." Another episode in Acts involving Paul further illustrates the situation. Paul went to Ephesus and immediately became an attraction as his powers to perform miracles, i.e., to have magical powers, became apparent to the populace. Articles such as a handkerchief and clothing that had merely touched him cured disease and drove out evil spirits. Other Jewish would-be miracle workers attempted to duplicate his success by invoking the name of Jesus, as Paul did. 7 sons of a Jewish head priest tried this. But an evil spirit they were exorcising said to them, quote, "I acknowledge Jesus and Paul who preaches him, but who are you?" And the possessed man bloodily thrashed the sons on the spot. This clear proof of the power of Jesus' name brought many converts, Acts 19, verses 11 through 20, because the efficacy of a sorcerer was judged by his success rate. Paul was successful, and many ordinary men were convinced of his supernatural power. The quote-unquote 7 sons of Sceva were not successful and so were discredited. Many other magicians recognized Paul's power and even burned their valuable magical guidebooks since he had proved his power greater. All these episodes in Acts serve to show how pervasive the belief in the power of the supernatural was, and the numerous people around who claimed to be purveyors of that power. Religion provided another avenue for addressing concerns. A broad range of religious activity wasn't offered. These were the reflexive actions, the traditional, hardly conscious daily rites, like pouring some drops of offering to the household gods before a meal. There were festival religiosity when, in the midst of this or that god's holy day, banqueting or entertainments or just raucous behavior were in order, part and parcel of the worship of the deity or deities in question. This type of religiosity was centered on the major local or civic divinities. On festival days, the local gods were feted, as were the people. More elaborate sacrifices were offered, and entertainments were often sponsored in honor of the god or goddess. It was a time to affirm the community. Then there was utilitarian religiosity, the use of a priest or prophet or a diviner to help solve an immediate problem. In fact, people who claimed to be able to foretell the future were always available in a town. The elite Cicero notes that, quote, wherever you go, it follows you, whether you listen to a prophet or an omen, whether you sacrifice a victim or catch sight of a bird or warning, whether you interview an oriental soothsayer or an Italian diviner, whether you see lightning or hear thunder. That's from On Divination 2.149. These diviners were available because there was a deep need to make sense of the world and to somehow reconcile the incongruence of the personal world and the external world's assaults upon it. And everyone agreed that the future was established and therefore knowable, that prophecy and augury and other means of reaching out to that future were real and efficacious. Dream interpretation was a favorite recourse, with professionals such as Artemidorus ready both to offer their services and to write a book about interpretations. Men like Dorotheus wrote books about astrology, and self-help tools like Ouija boards were readily available, an inexpensive way to discern the future. In this world, the ordinary man rarely dwelled on the intricacies of religious thought. Everyone agreed that there were supernatural powers in the world. Since the divine agencies were in control, all agreed that these powers could be accessed by prayer and sacrifice and incantation and magic. If an agreement could be made and carried out, a reciprocal action in favor of the worshipper could be expected. What one did and what brought results were what mattered. Carrying out the correct action in the correct way was the key to securing divine aid. There was no creed or moral code to adhere to in order to gain the god's favor. For this reason, there were no arguments about dogma in the bars and streets. The proof of a divinity's power lay in his or her ability to produce results in real time. It is illustrative of this that the many confrontations with magic in the New Testament literature all revolve around whose magic is most efficacious, never about the philosophy or theology of the practitioner. Major disruptions occurred not over theology, but when the power of a favorite divinity was questioned or insulted. This is well illustrated by another of Paul's experiences in Ephesus. The temple of Artemis was known widely and was a popular votive destination. A silversmith named Demetrius and his fellow workers made a good deal of money creating and selling silver images of the goddess. This craftsman took action to protect his trade. He incited his fellows by pointing out that Paul was convincing many to turn from polytheism. The danger, he said, was not only that Artemis herself was being discredited, but also that their trade and votives would dry up. With a shout of, quote, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians," the gang radicalized the city against Paul. A mob laid hold of him, dragged him to the theater, and tried to have him punished. This all in Acts 19, verses 23 through 24. The accusation was that Paul had blasphemed against the goddess. Quote, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians" was not a theological issue for them. It was a simple affirmation by the people that their goddess not only existed, but was powerful. Anyone threatening that reality was an enemy. Although among the elite the idea of a relationship between moral behavior and the favor of the gods gained some ground through, for example, Stoic thought, there was little indication that such thinking penetrated to those who remained tied to their basically satisfying and satisfactory religious beliefs. These were based upon efficacious supernatural powers who could, with the proper approach, be enlisted in solving the practical problems of the day, such as illness, frustration in love, and vengeance against one's enemies and rivals. To attack the existence of, as here, a goddess, undercut a central tool ordinary people use to address their everyday problems. In all these attempts to access the power of the supernatural in order to deal with the uncertainties in their lives, men were not terribly concerned when their efforts did not work. The prevailing attitude was that if an incantation or a religious offering did not do the trick, then something had gone wrong with the process, not with the basic functioning of the magico-religious world. The wrong spell prayer had been cast, or it has been cast carelessly, or had used the wrong accoutrements. There is no indication of a lessening of reliance on religion and magic throughout our period, or indeed in all of antiquity. So the next page starts a new heading called Worries. So I think that I'll stop that here for this video. So that's very interesting because I read the scriptures. So I've read pretty much all those scriptures quite a few times over the years. But it's very interesting the framework that Robert Knapp puts in. The lack of moral integrity, as it were, in ancient Roman and Greek, or just generic ancient worlds, mystical outlook on life. Is a stark contrast between that and, say, like the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. But more to the point, it hones right in on like the Roman world and the ancient Greek world as well. in terms of that the average person is putting an incredible amount of faith or hope. I don't know if they'd necessarily use the word faith. Would that be right? I'd have to ask somebody who's a classicist about that. If faith is an accurate word for like belief in ancient gods and pantheons. Is it more faith or is it more uh, some form of like spiritual economics? I don't know. Now that's got me thinking. But yeah, but thank you very much if you've watched this. I hope that you like and subscribe. As you hear on every video everyone on YouTube does. I will be back next time to start the subheading on worries, see where that takes us, how much that educates us. But thank you very much for coming along and watching this. If you get a chance, feel free to leave a comment. I will answer you back. And until then, I hope you stay safe. I hope you stay content and you keep your nose in a good book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, and keep learning and adventuring. Stay safe.